For months, Adobe has been promising a 3D version of its AI engine Firefly, and now we have it in the form of Project Neo. It does not require credit, so it's free to play. You lay down one or more 3D objects to establish a composition, then enter a text prompt and see what Firefly comes up with. Notice that I have an artboard, so it's using Illustrator terminology. I'm going to change that artboard to 16 by 9. The specific resolution doesn't really matter because Firefly still tops out at 2 to 4 megapixels. Nothing you can do about that as things stand right now. So notice I'm presented with a cube sitting on a ground plane. And I'm not going to turn this into a big Neo tutorial, of course. I want to get to the AI as quickly as possible. So I'm just going to drag the ground plane around. Also, by the way, you can zoom in. So I'm doing this using the scroll wheel on my mouse. You can also pan by spacebar dragging. So some pretty familiar stuff. If you want to change the so-called orbit, you would right drag like so in order to spin your composition in 3D space. In any event, I don't really want my ground plane. I want it to be here for now. It's just another object, by the way, but I don't want it to be quite so cornery. I want the corners to be more rounded. So notice that I have a couple of different tools up top here. I've got the select tool V, just like the black arrow tool, and then I've got A for the edit tool, A just like the white arrow tool. So I'm gonna go ahead and drag this widget right here in order to round things off. And then I'll press the V key actually to switch back to the black arrow, the big arrow that is to say, and notice these widgets right here. They allow you to move the object along a specific axis, so I could drag it up into the cube and then shorten it because I'm gobbling up the cube with the ground plane. The shadow kind of tells the story right there. And if I want to scale this object, stretch it that is, then I would drag one of these cubicle looking widgets like so. All right, now what I want to do is grab my cube. Might as well work with it. There's all kinds of objects if you want to get all complicated. A lot of different things that you can add right here. And so a lot of different shapes, that is to say primitives. And you can bring in your own, if you like, your own wireframes. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this guy wider like so, maybe a little deeper as well, about like that, I think. And then if I want to move it back and forth, I can do so using these arrows. If you just decide to drag the shape, don't be surprised. Watch what happens with the shadow. I want you to see this. I'm going to drop this shape onto the ground plane. I'm going to snap it. So this snaps objects together, at least by default. And that's worth knowing because it can be a little frustrating at first, kind of figuring out your way around Neo, the 3D world that it is. I also, by the way, want to introduce some perspective. So I'm going to click off the shape right here so that nothing's selected. And then my properties shows me the scene. Isn't that good to know? Because that way you can switch your projection to isometric if you like, or you can introduce some perspective. That alone, I think, is worth clicking the subscribe button, do you not? But if you do, click it. And now what I'm going to do is right drag some more in order to change the orbit, and I'm going to spacebar drag in order to move this guy up, and so on and so on. If I want to, of course, zoom in a little bit, then I can use the scroll wheel on my mouse. Now is the time we want to introduce some basic AI. And you do that by calling on Firefly. Notice this icon over here, Adobe Firefly. That just creates a communication with it. By the way, it doesn't switch you to Firefly in a conventional sense. And now notice that it's presenting me with landscape. I don't want that. I want widescreen. I want it to match at least the aspect ratio of the composition that I've created. So this is the whole advantage here, is that you've got this composition from which Firefly is going to work. And so this is pretty complicated prompt-wise. A wooden pirate's chest in a secluded rocky cave. It's flung wide open. It's overflowing with treasure. It's backlit by an eerie blue light, by the way. And so now I'm going to click generate, and I'm going to get the standard 4 variations, incidentally. And so the big advantage here, once again, as opposed to just working inside Firefly or Photoshop, it's generative imaging, is that it's going to match the composition. You can see that right there, and we get these 4 different variations right here. Now, I want to urge you, because things can go wrong. This is very beta software, and you can just completely lose your variations. Even though they don't cost you anything, it's free to play, but still, you don't want to lose what you've come up with, right? Especially if you like it. And so click download right there, very important. And then notice that it's going to save as a ping. Well, that's one of the current bugs, that's one I've discovered. I'm going to go ahead and paste it in my prompt, because after all, I want to have a vague idea of what the prompt is. And then I'll just select one of these file names that I've created in advance. I'll go with 5, but this is what really matters here. Notice that I've changed the file extension to JPG instead of ping. It's not saving the ping file. If you save it on the Mac and open it in preview, it's going to open just fine, because preview is smart enough to know. And here we are inside Photoshop. It's going to be smart enough to know as well if you save it with the ping extension when it's really a JPEG file, but other programs will not. Anyway, here it is, open inside Photoshop. It's by no means perfect. It's got all kinds of rough edges all over the place, but notice that we are seeing the edges of the ground plane. Let's say you don't want that. Then I'll go back to Neo here, and you can still work over here on the left-hand side. So you can still work with your 3D primitives that you've set up. And I'm going to go ahead and select that ground plane. I could delete it just to get rid of it, or I could bring up my layers. Notice that. And I could just hide it. Just hide the ground plane. And then I could just try the prompt again and see what it comes up with if there is no round ground plane in the background. And wow, look at that. Aren't these better? I think these are much more realistic fare. And I am going to take a moment to save these, by the way, because again, I just think that's a good idea. I just want you to take a moment to do that. And I'll go ahead and call this one 6.jpg once again. And then I could open it up inside Photoshop. And in this time, I just want you to see the difference. We do not have any indication of that kind of oval ground plane. We have much more natural transitions. Hey, real quick, want to learn more about how to work inside Project Neo? Want to create something more complicated than an elongated cube? Then join my Patreon, which is patreon.com/DeekNow, and learn how to do stuff like save a file, add more 3D shapes, and create your own custom 3D type effects. Here back in Neo, you can add some style effects. So I'm looking at the Firefly options right here. I could go with the popular stuff like digital art, but I also want low lighting, and I'm looking for golden. And as a concept, I want beautiful. Should that even matter? I'm not sure it does. But anyway, let's just try generating that AI image again, or at least those 4 variations. And my goodness, isn't this so very beautiful? And you may not think so, but it is a state of the art. That's what I really want to highlight more than anything, is that this really expands your creative range, whether you're getting exactly the effect you want or not. It sounds like I'm hedging. I'm not. I'm just telling you these are your new options. Because gosh, I mean, just look at that. So again, you're establishing the composition, and then you're letting Firefly run from there. And yes, in case you were wondering, Neo does offer a text tool right here. It doesn't offer a lot of different fonts, but you can play with that. And that's great because you can establish exactly, for example, the angle of the type in 3D space. And then I will go ahead and enter a prompt, because after all, I'm already looking at Firefly. Ancient weathered old branches, change that aspect ratio to widescreen, and then click generate. But don't get too lost in the weeds. Don't panic, in other words, because since this is beta, as things stand now, you are not using any credits. It's totally free to play, such as it is. And I'm thinking this is, you know, the thing that Firefly has done really well since day one is text effects. And these guys are looking very nice indeed. And just for the record, here they are open inside Photoshop, variation 1, 2, 3, and variation 4. So what do you think? Comment below and then subscribe and turn on notifications so you know what more I have to share with you in the future. For a deep dive into the 3D world of Project Neo, join me at patreon.com/DeekNow and then go to Deek.com and sign up for my 3D entirely hand-generated newsletter. I'm Deke McClellan. This is Deek Now.